This is episode 17 of the Shameproof Your Life podcast, the one where I talk about crying. I'm your host and life coach, Danita Brummer. Have you ever received a prompting that you ignored for a long time, like 17 years? This podcast is that for me. I'm telling my stories, I'm learning from my past, and I'm inviting you to come along for the ride because I know my story can help others. I'm not alone, and neither are you. Okay, so I have my tissue ready because this is going to be one of those episodes that I'm already emotional thinking about it. I can't imagine not getting emotional during the episode here. So, just a little warning that I might cry because we're talking about crying today. As I look back on my life, I feel like the first half of my life, maybe more than half of my life, I struggled to keep the tears in. And now I wouldn't say it's a struggle, but it's a continual process of getting the tears out. So there's some irony there. Before I kind of go back to my childhood and a few stories from growing up, I wanted to talk to you about when the floodgates opened. So, all throughout growing up, I learned to stuff my emotions down and to not cry and to like deal with that lump in my throat. And I had an experience where the one of the ways that I knew that it wasn't coming from me was that the tears flowed so easily. And it was when I was coming back to church after not having attended church for about 5 years. I was in a Relief Society meeting, and I may have mentioned this on the podcast, but I'm already forgetting what stories I've told and which ones I haven't. So if you've heard it again, it's a good one. I was in a Relief Society meeting when the question came up, do you have your own testimony of Joseph Smith? And in that moment, I realized that my whole entire life, I had been relying on my grandparents' testimony of Joseph Smith. And I was given a desire to know for myself. And so I prayed and I opened my scriptures and I was reading my scriptures and I was on a public bus going to my first class in college. And it was a busy time, so the bus was very crowded and I had my scriptures open, reading my scriptures on the bus. I'm one of those people that I always have to maximize all my time and like use it for the best. And I don't know why. This day I I had started from like the introduction of the Book of Mormon, I think the night before, a couple nights before. And so I was reading the introduction. I wasn't even in the actual scripture part, but I was reading the introduction. And there's this part where the angel Moroni comes to Joseph Smith 3 times throughout the night. And then the cock crows, and Joseph realizes that his engagements with the angel had taken up the entirety of the night. And so he goes out to do his chores, his farm chores. But of course, he's been awake all night. And so he's very tired and almost a little bit sick. And so his dad tells him to go back in. And as he's walking across the field to go back to the house, he falls down and the angel visits him again. And the angel instructs him to go tell his father about his experience with the angel Moroni. So he does that. And there's a line, I should have gotten my scriptures out, but there's a line in the introduction where Joseph Smith Sr. says, "This must be from God," or something to that effect. And when I read that on that public bus in Seattle on my way to class, like the spirit hit me so strongly and I couldn't help but to just cry. So I'm sitting there crying with tears running down my face on this public bus with like people surrounding me. And I'm like kind of trying to hide it. I think I'm just trying to cry quietly, but it was as if like the spirit was testifying to me because I never cried that easily ever. And I feel like ever since that moment, now I'm not able to keep my tears in, like they just come out. So that's when the floodgates of my tears opened back up, and it's been an interesting, I don't know, it's been 20 years now. 20 years of getting to know myself and getting to know the spirit and getting to know Heavenly Father again. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I feel like this is kind of a tender topic for me. But I know it's also really, really common that people feel ashamed of crying and of their emotions. And so I just felt inspired to talk about this. And as I was reflecting on like being a young child and crying or not crying, I actually get this sense that I cannot remember as many times where I did cry as those times where I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I didn't allow myself. So there was a time in kindergarten where we had, this is like 1985. Think of the typical playground equipment, which is like the standalone metal slides. So we had this metal slide, the kind with a ladder and then a little teeny tiny platform at the top, and then a pretty steep metal slide. And then there was sand. It was sand. It wasn't bark. Of course, the rubber stuff hadn't really been invented yet. And all of my classmates were climbing up to the top of the slide. And then instead of sliding down, they were turning around and jumping back off over the ladder. And I was like, I kind of want to do that. Like I want to fit in because everyone else is doing it, but I'm actually really scared of it. And now that I look back, probably the top of the slide was only like 4 feet tall or 5 feet tall. Like it probably wasn't that big of a jump. But man, I remember what that looked like standing at the top of this slide and looking down toward the ground and all the other kindergartners kind of cheering me on, going, come on, you can do it. And then jumping and then not like, I don't know if I blacked out or if I don't know if I just was so thoroughly embarrassed or hurt, but I hit my foot, I hit my ankle on the one of the ladder rungs as I jumped down. And I think it's probably because I was so scared. I probably had some kind of wimpy little jump, right? That if I had just gone for it and jumped outward, it would have been fine. But I remember my teacher carrying me in her arms to the nurse's office and just feeling so embarrassed. I don't remember crying. I mean, I probably did, but I don't remember. I just remember kind of whimpering. Um, and then around second grade, maybe third grade, I don't quite know the timing on this. I think it was around second grade. There was this incident with an older kid on the bus. He was kind of a bully. He was mean to everyone. Nobody wanted him to sit with them. And somehow he poked his pencil in my lip. And I do distinctly remember I did not cry. And my friend, my best friend who was sitting with me was like, are you okay? And like I wanted to cry, but I didn't allow myself to cry. There was also a memory that came up of my mom and dad picking us up at the bus stop because we lived like 4 miles on this dirt road, and so the bus didn't go all the way up to our house. It just dropped everyone off that lived past the dirt road, past where the pavement turned to dirt. It was kind of like this big stop, and I don't know, 15 or 20 kids all lived up there, and parents would have to come meet the kids at the bus stop to take them home. And so my parents had this little car. I don't even remember what kind it was. And they picked up me and my sister and my cousins and my oh, you know what? Maybe I was older because my little sister was born. So this must have been when I was older, like more like 6th grade. Um, so we're all sort of like piled in this car. Of course, nobody's wearing seatbelts because it's just this little dirt road. You can't really go faster than like 25 miles an hour. And we're heading along, and there's a couple of blind turns on this road, but so few people live up there that the odds of meeting someone on these blind turns are very low. And we come around the turn, and my uncle is coming the other direction. And no, my dad and my uncle couldn't stop in time. Of course, neither car was going very fast, but they had like a head-to-head collision. And we all sort of like were thrown forward and then thrown back, and my little cousin who wasn't in school yet, he also wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and he hit his lip and I think a piece of glass. Like, they didn't have a windshield. This is how, like, redneck I grew up. They didn't have a windshield. They just used this car just only to go up and down the dirt roads. I doubt if it was registered or anything. And he hit his lip, and a piece of glass went through his lip. And so I'm the oldest cousin, and so my parents and my uncle said, "Go run to your aunt and tell her what happened. We probably need to take Tony down to, to the doctor or something, get a couple stitches." And so I just remember like feeling like shaky, but not crying. Like, what kid? I was probably 11 or 12 years old at the time. What kid doesn't cry when that happens? Like, you've just been in an accident, and maybe we'd classify it now as like a fender bender, but I was young enough. I didn't know what was going on. All I knew was that my cousin was pretty hurt, and we were only maybe half a mile from home. So my sister and I started running down the road to home, and we got around the bend, and I um I told her we need to kneel and say a prayer. And then so we knelt and we said a prayer, and then we ran the rest of the way, and my aunt was there, and she was like, "What are you guys doing here?" And we're of course telling her like, "Oh, they got in an accident." Um, but I don't remember like really crying that whole time. There was another time kind of similar. I remember coming home and just running to my aunt. I don't know why, like if my parents weren't home or something, but running to my aunt and telling her the police were at school and they pulled us out of class and they were asking us all these questions. And my aunt, and I actually think my parents were home, but she was just like the first one I saw or something like that. Um and this was, I think, around 4th grade, so I was probably about 10. And the whole time, the school had pulled us out of class, us being me and my sister and a couple of my cousins, and they brought us into this conference room, and we had no idea what was going on. Like, I thought we were in trouble or something, and then the police came in, and they just started asking us all these questions about my uncle and my aunt and how they treated the kids and all of this stuff. Apparently, somebody had witnessed something and had called the police, and so they were investigating like a possible like child abuse type case. I don't think it ever went anywhere, but I remember just being really shook at school and feeling like something was wrong. Um and wanting to be honest and truthful, but also, this is my family you're talking about, right? Like, not wanting my family to go away, even if it is the family that maybe sometimes hurts you, right? And just being so conflicted in my heart, and getting home and like saying like they pulled us out of school and the police were there and they were asking us all these questions. And I remember my mom and my aunt, who are sisters, um, kind of talking together, and they, like, got really upset and angry, and I think maybe I did break down crying once I got home and was telling them, and because I remember my aunt putting her arm around me and just saying, like, "It'll be okay." Um, see, I knew I was gonna cry this episode. And one more story, a little bit lighter. Also in 6th grade, I had a little boyfriend, and we were really good friends before he, asked me out, in air quotes. And it was kind of like one of those things that was just only at school, and he was such a gentleman. He was amazing. But at a certain point, I realized that I didn't really like him that way, like in a romantic way, and I preferred him to just be my friend, and so I told him that and we broke up. And I don't know if it was that day or the next day, I went to open my Trapper Keeper. You remember Trapper Keepers? It's like a binder with a Velcro flap that was branded or whatever. Opening my Trapper Keeper, and it was like the rings of it were all bent and broken. It's still closed mostly and mostly worked. And I remember being really confused, like, "What? How did I, like, go from using my Trapper Keeper, an hour ago to, like, now it's broken?" And then I noticed that there was, like, a footprint, like a shoe print inside of my Trapper Keeper, and I just knew that the boy I just broke up with, like, he tried to ruin it because he was really upset with me. And I don't know. I remember being upset, but I don't think I cried. But I remember like wanting to cry. Like I remember feeling the tears kind of well up and just being really upset and like I think he actually sat right next to me and like turning to him and asking like, "Did you do this?" And him saying, "Yes," and kind of sheepishly. And his dad actually worked for the school and caught wind of this whole situation and was like, "He needs to apologize to you, and I'm so sorry that happened." And it ended up being fine, and we ended up being friends after that. But like it was just kind of a moment when I remember really wanting to cry. And of course, I wasn't physically hurt, but I was emotionally hurt, like somebody who I thought was my friend and all of that. So it was actually a really interesting exercise to think back on all the times that I've cried and felt embarrassed or ashamed, or all the times that I wanted to cry but didn't allow myself. And one thing I didn't mention was how many nights did I cry myself to sleep with my fingers in my ears, trying to keep the sounds of my parents arguing out of my head. Like that was for sure a thing, but it was like it was okay to cry in my bed where nobody knew I was doing it. At least I thought nobody knew. Like, I think I would wait until my sister, who slept in the top bunk above me, like, I would wait until I thought she was asleep, and then I would try to cry, and, like, I perfected, like, the silent cry, right? And I've just been thinking about, like, why do we cry? And why do we get so ashamed of it? Why are we so ashamed of crying? And as I look back on my experiences with tears, and I have now that I have coaching and I have a coach and we talk about things that come up, sometimes I find myself crying and I literally have no idea why. The only thing I can think of is that something I'm saying or something she's saying is striking a chord within me and it's like resonating in my soul, and so then, like, the tears come out? I don't know. And the other thing I've heard said is that, crying is when your emotions are really big and they feel bigger than you. And my coach recently said that if you're crying, it means that you're ready for healing. And I liked that. I liked that idea. But as I was thinking about this episode and why do I think I cry and why does it feel shameful? I think it's because it feels vulnerable. Whatever the situation is, feels very vulnerable. And I don't know, maybe there's an element of like it's resonating with your soul. It's, speaking to you. It's like your body speaking to you. I also think there's an element of whatever's going on in that moment is you're like connecting with yourself. And it's almost like a sign to yourself to remember this, remember how this feels, or this is like an opportunity for growth or for healing, like I said. And I think it's so interesting that we have shame over crying because sometimes we cry because we're so happy too. After my mom died, I don't know, maybe it probably was that the Christmas right after my mom died, my husband, who was only my boyfriend at the time, the gift he got me for Christmas was two framed photos of my mom. And I opened them and I just immediately started bawling. And he was like, "Are you okay? Did I do something wrong?" And I was like, "No, I'm just like, thank you so much. This is so perfect." Right? I mean, they were like happy tears. It was like, "Oh, how did you know?" It's like a seeing of the soul on a different level. And I've had so many moments with my own children of just those really poignant moments that like life is good and I'm so proud of them and that like I cry. I cry a lot actually when I'm happy or I'm proud or I just feel like, things are right. And Brené Brown says that that's a really vulnerable thing is that moment of joy when you feel so fulfilled and life feels like it's right. It's actually really vulnerable. Those are the moments that I notice myself tearing up and wanting to cry and my kids rolling their eyes like, there goes mom again. She's crying, right? But now tears have become almost like a path back to myself as a young kid, a teenager, a young adult even, crying was like a moment of like shame, of like of weakness. Maybe that's what it is that we associate vulnerability with weakness, but it doesn't have to be. And so then we try to shove down our tears or our emotions in whatever form they take. And really, wouldn't it be so much more beautiful if we gave ourselves permission to have all of our emotions in their purest, truest, largest forms? That's what I think. I think crying is a beautiful thing when I show up to sacrament meeting and people are crying. I love that. I appreciate it so much. And yeah, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable, but it's only because I'm witnessing someone else's vulnerability. Gotta blow my nose on that. So I don't know. I guess my message to you is to lean into the tears, lean into the crying, let it be a connection and a healing with yourself. And don't be ashamed of it because it doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean something has gone wrong. Of course, we also cry when we have pain. And again, like, does that mean that crying in and of itself is bad? I don't think so. I think it's just a sign from your body to say, hey, we need some care right now. And maybe that's what the sign is, even when we're not in physical pain, even when we're in emotional pain. Maybe it's just a sign of, hey, I need some care right now. I need some connection. And that is such a beautiful thing. Okay, that's enough for now. And so are you. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit. I would be ever so grateful if you would rate, review, and share the podcast because here's the thing with shame, it always wants to hide. You never know who is struggling, but rating, reviewing, and sharing the podcast might help someone you had no idea needed it. I would also love to continue the conversation. Come tell me what you think about crying. Come find me on Instagram or Facebook at Danita Bremer Coaching.